AM 1460, the new WXBR. You are listening to the Talk of Metro South. Peter Czymbor here with you on a Friday morning. Joining us right now via the telephone is a former WWE champion. He's a former New York Times best-selling author, and at the conclusion of this interview, he will have been interviewed as many times by me as he has been Katie Couric. We welcome into the program Mr. Mick Foley. Mick, good morning and welcome to the program.
Now, before I qualify that, do you include my surprise appearance to be there for Kevin James as a guest on the Katie show? That makes it 3.
Oh, man, I have to catch up to Katie. You'll have to come back on again at some point.
All right.
Because I'm on the Katie Couric meter right now. You're very proud of the times you've been interviewed by Katie Couric, it seems.
Well, it wore off after 5 or 6 years. But for 5 or 6 years, that was how I was introduced. 3-time WWE champion, 2-time New York Times #1 best-selling author, and has been interviewed twice by Katie Couric. And I got to be honest with you, when I showed up this past several months ago, the magic was gone. So, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I still respect you as a journalist, but the magic seemed to have dissipated after all those years.
Did you feel that you and Katie Couric had a very good rapport during your interviews in the past, and after all this time, it's just worn off?
No, we did have we had a great interview. We had a great rapport. My kids claim I had a crush, and I can only say, since no one can look at me and read my facial features, that was not the case. It was just a utmost respect thing.
The utmost journalistic respect, strictly platonic, the relationship between Mick Foley and Katie Couric, as is the relationship between you and I, Mick, strictly platonic.
Yeah, I'd hate to think of it any other way.
We're chatting with Mick Foley here on WXBR. He's performing this Sunday in Forestdale, Massachusetts, and later on in June. You'll be performing at the Kowloon on June 27th and 28th, respectively, doing stand-up comedy, storytelling. You're sort of a traveling raconteur at this point. Last time we had you on the program, you were just sort of venturing into this for the first time. Now it seems like you've really got the ball rolling. You've been on TV doing stand-up comedy. You're a stand-up comic now as much as you were a professional wrestler at one point.
Man, I still cringe when I hear stand-up comic.
Okay.
Because I think in people's minds it's like, oh, he's going to be telling jokes, and that's I've actually used this. I'm not just saying this is a New England reference, but I've said, like, if people hear, hey, Tom Brady doing stand-up comedy, they would stay away because out of respect for Tom. If they heard Tom Brady discussing his career, telling stories about characters he met along the way, I'd love to hear that. So it's the difference in when I'm on stage and when I see other comics, they go, well, storytelling is a form of stand-up comedy, but I just don't want to scare away those people who might be on the fence and are afraid that I'm going to be like, so tell me about this weather. What's with the beards on those Red Sox? That's not what I do. Although maybe I will do a piece on the beards on the Red Sox.
What's the deal with body slams? That's not what they're going to get, right?
No. They'll get really good. They'll get really good stuff. And like the thing in Sandwich this weekend. There's only about 20 tickets left. That's an all ages show, and I'm proud of the fact I could tell really colorful stories about some pretty grisly injuries and make it suitable for kids. And in Saugus at the Kowloon, this may be one of those few cases where my performance is hindered by the amount of food I've eaten beforehand.
The Kowloon is legendary for their fantastic Chinese food.
Oh man, I love the Kowloon, and apparently I was the guy responsible for starting this trend in wrestlers and therefore fans all like kind of gathering post show. I think I was the first one that I went with Andy, the owner of the Kowloon, and Boston's own Phil Castanetti to have a meal, and started bringing other wrestlers with me. And over the years, it's kind of turned into this phenomenon.
The Kowloon in Saugus has become so synonymous with professional wrestlers visiting that establishment when they were in town. A few years back on an episode of Monday Night Raw that was at the Garden in Boston, when John Cena mentioned the Kowloon, it probably got as much applause as anything got that night.
And I'm thrilled that John Cena will be at my show in Saugus.
Well, John
Senior, the dad, who's like the greatest, the greatest guy in the world. So I asked John, the son, I said, hey, once in a while I break out this thing called like great moments in wrestling history. How would Dad, how would you feel about your dad like coming on and us replicating that awful This Is Your Life segment we did in Boston? And John looks at me and he goes, please. And I'm thinking the next words are, don't do that to him. He goes, please do it. He'll love it.
John Cena's dad is actually quite legendary, and I mean this affectionately as a ham. He loves to... He loves the attention that comes with being John Cena's dad, so much so that he's created his own indie wrestling character for himself, and he goes around high school gyms and does it.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was away from WWE for several years, I would see John Sr. all the time, so we were passing on messages, and got a great picture of John's dad with my family. It's like the only guy in his 70s actually handing out, Fabo bucks. He's got his own. It's just a great story. So I don't know which night John Sr. will be there. He's certainly welcome to come both nights. But we will be recreating This Is Your Life, John Cena, which was one of the great bad segments in WWE history.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the first This Is Your Life segment you did with The Rock, probably in the late 90s, and you tried to replicate that a decade plus later with John Cena to mixed success, and it doesn't seem like you were as pleased with the sequel as you were the original.
Well, the thing is, it was supposed to be bad. That was the...
Well, maybe it was good then.
It was so bad it was good. I mean, it was John's dad coming out and admonishing the crowd for booing his son. And I don't want to give it away because I don't want to give away the verbiage. Because I don't know if it's not that it's bad or FCC related, but it might not be what you want in your particular show. But it was funny, and I found myself watching it back and laughing many times. But it was intended to be bad, and in that case, it was very successful.
We're chatting with Mick Foley here on WXBR, performing at the Sandwich Taverna in Forestdale on Sunday. He'll be performing at the Kowloon in Saugus, Massachusetts on June 27th and 28th, respectively. You mentioned earlier that you were able to tell tales of some pretty grisly injuries which you have accrued throughout your wrestling career in terms that are safe for children. Tell us about some of the different injuries you've had throughout your career that make their way into your act, because just some that people know of off the top of their head. They know about the tooth through the lip and the nose when you got thrown off the cage by The Undertaker, losing your ear, concussions. What else is there that people might not be aware of that you can take the pain and somehow make it comedic on stage?
Well, anything, from that infamous cell match, it's strange how much humor you can find in the events that transpired. Even when I'll look at, I'll find like a non-fan, and there's always a handful of them, and they always end up having a good time. And whether they know anything about me at all, it doesn't matter. By the time, we get 45 minutes in, they realize I'm not a man of great fashion sense. And so when I point out that I'm actually fortunate that I did not know, that I had a tooth sticking out of my nose, I will specifically look at one of the non-fans, and I'll look at them and say, because I would have been so embarrassed, and even though they've only known me for 40 minutes, they completely get that I'm kidding and poking fun at my own, lack of fashion. So I have a lot of fun, and I love it. People ask me, why aren't you on the show, the wrestling show more often? I'm like, I like being on the wrestling show, but I love doing these shows. Like it's like my own little ride, and it makes me feel like I used to feel when I was in the ring without getting hurt.
Now, when you do these storytelling ventures, which you'll be doing this weekend and on the 27th and 28th in the area, this is something you do independent of WWE, and I know that there has been some points of contention between not just yourself and WWE over the years, but between a lot of performers in WWE when they were venturing outside of the parameters of what we'll call the WWE universe into their own entertainment careers, whether it be singing, storytelling, comedy, music, things of that nature. Do you like being outside of the parameters of WWE, or do you appreciate the support you can get from WWE's many platforms in promoting your product while you're with them?
You know, it's kind of like a catch-22. Is I love the freedom of doing it. If WWE were ever to really take a look at the show, I think they could see that this is something that really should be under their umbrella. It's a wrestling. It's almost like an acoustic evening with WWE. Their fans would love it. So look, I really enjoyed Mike Tyson's show. I really did. He was nominated for a Tony, but I'm just one guy with a microphone. There's no props. It's just whatever I can do with a microphone, and I love how pure that is. But if WWE were ever to do a show where they incorporated, video and effects, we could really have something on our hands. But I can't make them, So I do my own thing, and I love it. And if they ever want to be partners, they know that door is open. But I'm not holding my breath.
Now, up until recently, you were a contracted worker for WWE. That is no longer the case, and towards the tail end of your tenure of having a contract with WWE, you were very critical of some of the decisions that they were making in terms of how they were working out their creative process leading up to WrestleMania. Did that ruffle any feathers with some of the higher-ups within the WWE organization?
Maybe. I think by the time I did that, I think my only tie legally was that I was still the general manager of Saturday Morning Slam. But look, I love the company, and if I think they're doing and I don't complain often, and that's why it was a big deal when I complained about the content. It's like I don't care how bad the show is, and I generally speaking I enjoy the show. I'm not going to complain about the content. I did make a mention. I wrote a piece about John Cena, how it's like I'd like to see him shift gears a little bit during this Bray Wyatt feud. Just like to see a little change, a little darker side. That's not a criticism, and and people know that I've been a big supporter of John's for a long time. It's just a suggestion about how he can make it even, this thing they have going on even better. But as a general rule, I like what I see, and I try to stay positive. But at the end of January, I thought that they were on the verge of losing a lot of people, not just their hardcore fans, but their casual fans. So I spoke out about it, and I don't know if it made a difference, but they certainly ended up doing the things that I hoped that they would do.
Now, you stated that if Daniel Bryan did not win the Royal Rumble, you would smash a television set. Not only did he not win the Royal Rumble, he was not even a participant in the Royal Rumble, and afterwards you posted a video on your Facebook page of you actually smashing a television set. Was that kind of the straw that broke the camel's back when you were like, what is going on? I've got to talk about this?
You really want to drag these things out of me, take a frosty relationship and just chill it. Just put it in the deep freeze. I
read your blog.
I followed through in a sense. My kids actually got a little frightened when I went out to get the brick, and it's funny is I actually ordered the pay-per-view on another TV with 10 minutes left so that I could break the TV in the room that had less stuff in it. And my kids were like, "Dad, what are you doing?" I try to be a man of my word, and I thought they would appreciate that. And all they could see. Well, their mom put it in their head that like the TV is going to explode in like just like a rain of gaseous, I think she had the old mercury cathode, huge tube in her mind. And really, what would have happened if I thrown a brick at the TV is the brick would have cracked the screen a little bit, it would have bounced off, and it would have been kind of lame. So I went out a couple days later with a bat that journeyman Major League catcher Sal Fasano had signed for my son. And as fate would have it, my son actually dressed up as Sal Fasano for Halloween when he was the Yankees' backup catcher.
Your son dressed up like the Yankees' backup catcher for Halloween?
Sal Fasano, yeah.
Okay.
Halloween, believe it or not. Yeah, I don't know. There's some strange genes in the Foley family. And I went outside 2 days later, and I broke my daughter's TV. My daughter now is hassling me about buying her another set. And I'm like, that's probably not going to happen.
You broke hers.
Officially, I believe if you go back and check the videotape, it's the most solid contact that a Sal Fasano bat has been involved with in years.
We're chatting with Mick Foley here on WXBR, performing this weekend and later in June in the area, doing some storytelling. Mick, we mentioned the infamous This Is Your Life segment earlier that you did with The Rock. Over the years, you and The Rock were a tandem, a tag team, and while being a tag team, you guys were not only participants in some very memorable matches, but you guys were participants in some incredibly comedic content that WWE produced. Do you think there's any chance that at some point in the future you and The Rock would ever share a stage or screen in some sort of comedic, doing some comedy?
Well, you know what? I think it's all dependent on The Rock. I think when he gets tired of making Hollywood blockbusters and he sees this empty space on his mantle where an Oscar could be, that I'll get the call. And you
don't think you'd ever do maybe a bit part in a comedy that he's in or something?
Honestly, I would love it if I were to ever get the call. I would love it. And for people who know me as a Santa enthusiast, I'm like, man, I would love to be. I don't have to be the star of anything. Don't get me wrong. I would love to do a buddy picture with The Rock. But like even last night when I was asked about appearing, reprising my my well-received role on Boy Meets World from 1999,
which is a classic. I still watch that show on reruns to this
for
day.
Love and Apartments, yeah. I was asked would I do a reprisal on the sequel Girl Meets World. I was like, are you kidding me? I would love it. I already told Topanga, like if she can cast me as like the wacky neighbor or as Santa Claus, that I'm in. Even if just for one episode.
Oddly enough, I just watched the episode yesterday that Vader guest starred in because his son was a character on the show, evidently.
Yeah. And I don't think Vader. It's funny because Vader was on it more than I was, I believe. I just did that one appearance, and it was a well-liked episode. And I think the fact that after all these years I'm still in touch with Topanga is something that makes people feel. It makes them feel good.
Do you feel about Danielle Fishel, the girl that played Topanga, as much as you felt about Katie Couric, or is that completely different?
No, it's completely different because Katie was up in my my age range, whereas that's yeah. My daughter's listening. Yeah,
And if your daughter's listening, we'll keep Topanga out of the discussion for the moment.
Yeah, no. I just posted a photo last night of me and Danielle from a couple months ago. First of all, she looks exactly like she did in 1999, and honestly, I don't look that much different than I did in 1999. So she's grown into a beautiful young lady, and on it, for the record, Noel, are you listening? Okay, now my son's listening, so the only copy of Maxim magazine I ever bought was one with Danielle on the cover because I did a double take. I was like, wait, that's Danielle from Boy Meets World, and so I did buy that issue.
Well, I will have to get my hands on that. I'm a big Danielle Fishel fan. It's Mick Foley joining us here on WXBR. I'm glad you mentioned that you're a Santa enthusiast because last time we had you on the show, the feedback consisted of this. Great interview, Mick Foley was entertaining, and more than a few people said, I saw that guy at Santa's Village one time. I'm not making that up either. More than a few people said, I saw that guy at Santa's Village in New Hampshire.
Well, you know what? I've been there every year, at least once, since 1996. Yeah, it's the best place in the world. I love it. It's funny because I saw this flyer on eBay. I have this habit of, now that I've learned to use the computer, I'll go on late at night and I'll buy these things that like meant something, some kind of inner child issue. I'm not claiming nobody goes into pro wrestling without unresolved issues to begin with. No one needs to be compete in like this weird form of warfare to be accepted by complete strangers unless they have something lacking inside of them. But I'll go on late at night and I'll get these little mementos. And so one of them turned out to be a flyer from Santa's Village. And I just love I love the look, the nostalgic look on that flyer. And I asked my T-shirt guy, who made the infamous or famous Cactus Jack wanted Dead or Alive T-shirts, and I said, can we turn this, illustration into a T-shirt? He got back and he said, we can, but the minimum press run is 48, and I only needed one. And despite all the stories, legendary stories of my thriftiness on the road, I went ahead and ordered 48 T-shirts just so I could have one. Then I divvied up some among my kids, some 2 and 3 X's for myself, gave a few out to people in the Santa community, and then I sent 24 of them to Santa's Village. And a few weeks later, I got the most beautiful email from Elaine, who's had the park in her family since 1953, and it turns out that was the first flyer the park had ever had. And she sent me a photo of all the children, the grandchildren, all the longtime employees gathered around the sled in the front, all wearing that T-shirt. So, yeah, saying I'm a Santa's Village fanatic would be an understatement. Every year since '96, including the 4 years where I lived in Florida.
I couldn't believe how many people said to me that they ran into you at Santa's Village. I thought that they must have all known each other and went together at one point, but evidently that must not have been the case. Mick Foley joining us here on WXBR, the second of 2 former WWE champions who's been on the program this week. The other was the Iron Sheik, as you have a storytelling venture in Forestdale this weekend and the Kowloon in June. Any Iron Sheik stories before we let you go, because he was quite amusing earlier this week?
Oh, he was on with you guys?
He was on with us earlier this week discussing his new documentary and discussing his feelings on Canadian politics and Rob Ford, of all things.
You know what? I don't want to be a downer, but I'm part of that Sheik documentary.
All right.
And I think I'll be a pretty... I was hesitant, and the reason I was hesitant to be part of it, I said, I'm not a real fan of the modern-day, kind of crash and burn Sheik, let's stop and take a look at the wreck on the side of the road Sheik. And I said, I'll talk about him, but I'll talk about the guy I knew, before all this fell apart. And it turns out that I did have a lot to say, some valuable stuff, because I'd been a huge fan at the time that he won the WWE. I was there that night at the Garden when he won the title from Backlund, and, I understood completely why that character worked, and I knew the background of him as a legitimate bodyguard for the Shah of Iran, and that it was Eric Embry, one of my bookers, who took this Khosrow Vazari and said, we're going to put pointed toes on you and make you the Iron Sheik. But so I think it's going to be a great documentary. But my stories of the Sheik are the real innocent ones, like where the Sheik didn't know that testing positive for drugs was not a good thing. There's that language barrier that positive is not always good. Sheik, I guess the news for you, tested positive on the drug test. Oh, beautiful baby.
I mentioned his real name that you mentioned moments ago. I said, born Cosgrove Vasiri, known to the world as the Iron Sheik, and he cut in, you very intelligent man for knowing my real name, and it just went off from there, and we were off in Sheikland. Mick, I know you've got to run, so I want to thank you so much for joining us on the program this morning. Hey, Mick, we got to do this again because I have to catch up to Katie Couric.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. Maybe the week before I hit the Kowloon, if there's tickets left, we will reminisce about the good times.
I look forward to that. That's Mick Foley joining us here on WXBR. Stick around. We'll step aside for a quick news update. Back with more of the program after this.
Have a nice day.